It happened on Halloween night in 2022, a night that started ordinary, but turned into something that still keeps me awake every year when the air gets cold and the wind carries that faint smell of smoke and wet leaves. I was 23 then, working as an assistant teacher in a small Oregon town called Ridgway, and after spending the entire day helping organize our school's Halloween fair, kids in messy costumes running around, pumpkins rotting under orange lights, and parents pretending to enjoy being there. I was so drained I could barely keep my eyes open. I drove home at sunset, thinking only about microwaving leftovers and watching an old horror movie, but the neighborhood I lived in always felt different after dark. Ridgway Lane was narrow and quiet, lined with trees that looked like black veins stretching into the sky, and my small rented house sat right at the end near the woods, where fog liked to settle like something alive. By the time I got inside, it was dark enough that my porch light was the only glow in the whole street. I remember how still everything felt, like the night was holding its breath. Around 8, there was the first knock. Light, polite, the kind of knock you'd expect from kids doing last-minute trick-or-treating. I smiled, grabbed a bowl of candy, opened the door, and handed some to 3 children in makeshift costumes. They laughed and ran off down the road. That was normal, but 10 minutes later, there was another knock, slower this time, heavier, and when I opened the door, nobody was there. Only the quiet hum of the porch light in a gust of cold air. I thought maybe they were hiding in the bushes playing a prank, so I laughed to myself and went back inside. But it happened again. 3 knocks, always 3, and every time I checked, no one. At first it was kind of funny. Then it became unsettling. Around 9, when it happened for the 5th time, I looked through the peephole instead of opening the door. There was nothing, only the darkness at the edge of my yard, and yet I could swear I heard breathing on the other side of the door, soft and uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. My stomach dropped. I backed away, locked every door, pulled the curtains, and tried to distract myself with the TV. About 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it without thinking, expecting maybe one of my coworkers or a wrong number, but the line was silent except for faint static. And then, after a few seconds, a voice whispered, low and calm, "Trick or treat." My hands went cold. Before I could say anything, the call ended. I blocked the number, told myself it was just some jerk playing games, and turned the TV up louder. But then the power went out. Every light in the house went black. The refrigerator stopped humming, and I could hear the house settle into that awful hollow quiet that happens when everything electrical dies at once. I stood perfectly still, and in that silence I heard it. A scraping sound at the back door, metal against glass, slow and deliberate. I didn't even breathe. The scraping stopped, then 3 slow knocks again, this time closer, followed by something even worse, a shadow moving past the kitchen window. I picked up the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and tiptoed toward the front room, my phone's flashlight shaking in my hand. When I peeked through the side curtain, I saw him. At the far edge of the backyard, half in the fog, half in shadow, was a tall figure wearing a long black coat and a mask shaped like a bird's beak, like one of those plague doctor masks from old horror paintings. He was just standing there, head tilted slightly, facing my house. I wanted to believe it was a prank costume, maybe some neighbor messing around, but the way he moved, slow, mechanical, felt wrong, like he wasn't pretending at all. I ducked down, grabbed my phone, and whispered to 911 that someone was outside my house trying to get in. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, lock myself in a room and wait. But before I could move, I heard a click behind me, the back door latch. My heart almost stopped. I whispered, "He's inside," and the dispatcher said police were on the way, but her voice felt 1,000 miles away. The footsteps came next, heavy, careful, crossing the kitchen. I turned off my flashlight and crawled into the laundry room, pressing myself behind the dryer, holding the knife so tightly that my hand was shaking. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. For a few seconds, there was total silence. Then a voice, familiar and calm, spoke from the dark. "You shouldn't have turned the lights off." I covered my mouth to keep from crying out. The door creaked open an inch, and I could see his shadow stretch across the floor. He was breathing slow and steady, and I could hear something metallic in his hand scraping the wall. Then suddenly there was a bang from the front of the house, a car door slamming, and flashing red and blue lights spilled across the window. Police sirens. Relief flooded through me so fast I almost sobbed. But just as I started to move, the voice whispered again, right outside the laundry room. "They're too late." The door burst open. I screamed and swung the knife wildly, felt it hit something solid, and then heard shouting, "Police! Drop it!" And everything turned into chaos. The figure lunged toward the back, but two officers tackled him hard before he reached the door. I dropped the knife and fell against the wall, shaking so badly I couldn't even speak. They pulled the mask off him, and my stomach turned to ice. It was Paul Henderson, the janitor from my school, the quiet, polite guy who always stayed late to clean classrooms after everyone left. I'd spoken to him dozens of times, even helped him carry boxes a week before. When they searched his car, they found duct tape, rope, a small handgun, and a folder filled with photos of me, leaving work, buying groceries, sitting in my car. He had been watching me for weeks, waiting. The detective said he'd followed me home after a late staff meeting in early October and had been living in an abandoned shed just beyond the woods behind my house. He'd stolen my spare key from under the porch, waited for the night everyone would be distracted by Halloween, and planned to come inside when the street was dark enough. I learned later that the power outage wasn't an accident. He'd cut the main breaker line from the outside. When they questioned him, he said almost nothing, just kept repeating, "You left your light on," over and over again. The police said he'd been arrested before for stalking women in other towns, but he'd always managed to get released on technicalities. After that night, I couldn't stay in that house another day. I moved 2 states away, changed my number, and installed cameras in every corner of my new place. But even now, years later, I can't forget the sound of those 3 slow knocks or the way his voice sounded when he whispered from the dark. Every Halloween since, I leave town for the night, because no matter how safe I try to feel, I still hear him in my head saying those same 2 words. Soft, calm, almost playful. Trick or treat. The night after Paul Henderson was taken away, I couldn't sleep. Even though the police had assured me he'd been booked, fingerprinted, and placed in a secure psychiatric wing until his arraignment, my house still felt alive with his presence, as if the walls themselves remembered the sound of his boots. The officers had left just before dawn, leaving the back door splintered, the floor smeared with footprints, in the faint metallic smell of blood and adrenaline that clung to the air no matter how many windows I opened. I told myself it was over, that I'd survived, that everything, the knocks, the whisper, the mask, was now evidence in a file. But when the sun rose thin and pale through the fog, I saw something that made my breath hitch. 3 small wet prints on the inside of my front door, shaped like fingertips dragging downward. I wiped them off, pretending it was nothing more than residue from the struggle, but deep down I knew I hadn't seen Paul's hands touch that part of the door. Later that morning, Detective Reeves, the lead investigator, came back to photograph the property and told me they'd found something strange in the shed behind the woods where Paul had been living. A dozen candles, half burned, arranged in a perfect circle around an old bird skull tied with red string. "Probably some ritual crap," he said, shaking his head. "Guy must have been sicker than we thought." He laughed it off, but I didn't. The way the skull's beak was pointed directly toward my house made my skin crawl. That night, after I'd spent the entire day cleaning, I tried to rest on the couch, too scared to sleep in my bedroom. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of faint tapping, 3 knocks, coming from the same back door that had been broken the night before. I froze, clutching the blanket, and told myself it had to be the wind. But then I heard something worse. My own name whispered from outside, slow, deliberate, the voice soft but unmistakably his. Emily. It couldn't be him. He was in custody. I turned on every light in the house, grabbed the phone, and called Reeves. He answered groggily, told me no one had been released, that Paul was still locked up. I apologized, said maybe I was hearing things. But even as I hung up, I could still hear the whisper, closer now, coming from somewhere inside. My flashlight beam landed on the hallway mirror, and for a split second, I saw movement behind my reflection. A tall, dark figure standing where the shadows met the kitchen. I spun around, but the space was empty. That's when the power flickered again, just once, like something testing the lines. I couldn't breathe. I went to the fuse box. This time the main breaker hadn't been cut. And yet, as I stood there, I heard slow footsteps crossed. The night after Paul Henderson was taken away, I couldn't sleep. Even though the police had assured me he'd been booked, fingerprinted, and placed in a secure psychiatric wing until his arraignment, my house still felt alive with his presence, as if the walls themselves remembered the sound of his boots. The officers had left just before dawn, leaving the back door splintered, the floor smeared with footprints, and the faint metallic smell of blood and adrenaline that clung to the air no matter how many windows I opened. I told myself it was over, that I'd survived, that everything, the knocks, the whisper, the mask, was now evidence in a file. But when the sun rose thin and pale through the fog, I saw something that made my breath hitch. 3 small wet prints on the inside of my front door, shaped like fingertips, dragging downward. I wiped them off, pretending it was nothing more than residue from the struggle, but deep down I knew I hadn't seen Paul's hands touch that part of the door. Later that morning, Detective Reeves, the lead investigator, came back to photograph the property and told me they'd found something strange in the shed behind the woods where Paul had been living. A dozen candles, half burned, arranged in a perfect circle around an old bird skull tied with red string. "Probably some ritual crap," he said, shaking his head. "Guy must have been sicker than we thought." He laughed it off, but I didn't. The way the skull's beak was pointed directly toward my house made my skin crawl. That night, after I'd spent the entire day cleaning, I tried to rest on the couch, too scared to sleep in my bedroom. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of faint tapping, 3 knocks, coming from the same back door that had been broken the night before. I froze, clutching the blanket, and told myself it had to be the wind. But then I heard something worse. My own name whispered from outside, slow, deliberate, the voice soft, but unmistakably his. Emily. It couldn't be him. He was in custody. I turned on every light in the house, grabbed the phone, and called Reeves. He answered groggily, told me no one had been released, that Paul was still locked up. I apologized, said maybe I was hearing things, but even as I hung up, I could still hear the whisper. Closer now, coming from somewhere inside. My flashlight beam landed on the hallway mirror, and for a split second, I saw movement behind my reflection, a tall, dark figure standing where the shadows met the kitchen. I spun around, but the space was empty. That's when the power flickered again, just once, like something testing the lines. I couldn't breathe. I went to the fuse box. This time the main breaker hadn't been cut, and yet, as I stood there, I heard slow footsteps cross the living room floor, stopping just outside the hallway. My pulse hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. I whispered, "Who's there?" And the answer came not in a voice, but in a faint echo that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "You left your light on." The same words Paul had said in the interrogation room, according to Reeves. I ran outside barefoot into the cold, fog swallowing the street. The neighbors' houses were dark. The police arrived 10 minutes later and searched the place top to bottom, finding nothing except one thing I hadn't noticed, a dead bird on my kitchen counter, its beak missing. Reeves took it away, promising to increase patrols around the area. I stayed at a motel that night, but even there I couldn't escape it. My phone kept buzzing with private numbers, and each time I answered, I'd hear static followed by those same 2 words. Trick or treat. I changed rooms twice, left the phone unplugged, but at exactly 3:03 a.m., the fire alarm went off without cause, and on the wall above the bed, written in what looked like soot, were 3 fingerprints dragging downward. The motel staff swore no one else had a key. The next day I drove straight to the hospital where they'd transferred Paul. Reeves met me there, furious that I'd shown up, but when I told him what was happening, he agreed to let me see for myself that Paul was truly behind bars. When we reached the observation window of his cell, I nearly collapsed. He was there, sitting perfectly still on the bed, eyes open but unfocused, whispering something under his breath. The nurse said he hadn't spoken to anyone for 24 hours except to repeat the same sentence. He's coming through the light. Reeves tried questioning him, but Paul just turned his head slowly toward the camera and smiled. a wide, unnatural grin that looked more like a grimace, and said, "You left your light on." We left immediately. Reeves looked shaken for the first time since I'd met him. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home, so I went to my friend Sarah's house. She'd been my co-worker at the school and the only person I trusted. I told her everything, from the knocks to the phone calls, and she tried to reassure me that trauma could play tricks on the mind, that I needed sleep. But around midnight, while we sat on her couch, her motion light outside the window flicked on by itself. Then came the 3 knocks. We froze. She whispered, "It's probably a kid." But when she opened the curtain, she went pale. Standing at the edge of her porch was a figure in a long black coat, face hidden by the same beak-like mask. I screamed, and the figure turned, not toward the door but toward the window, and I swear I saw smoke or mist rising from beneath the mask like breath in winter. Sarah called 911, but before she finished dialing, the lights cut out again. The darkness wasn't normal. It felt heavy, charged. The sound of something metallic scraping along the outside wall made my skin crawl. Then the voice came again, but this time it wasn't Paul's. It was deeper, distorted, almost 2 voices speaking at once. "You left your light on." I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the back door. But as we ran, every bulb in the house flickered back to life. And there, in the middle of the living room, lay the same bird skull the police had taken from the shed, the red string coiled tightly around it. Sarah screamed, dropped the phone, and as she did, I noticed something else. Symbols carved into her wooden floor, identical to the ones Reeves had shown me in photos from Paul's hideout. That was when I knew it wasn't just Paul. Whatever had made him do those things was still here, moving through lights, mirrors, electricity, something older than him, older than Ridgway. We spent the night at the police station. Reeves tried to hide his unease, but when they reviewed the footage from Sarah's security camera, the image showed nothing but static for the 3 minutes the lights went out. The timestamp on the file glitched to 00:00. The next morning, I decided to leave Ridgway for good. Reeves offered an escort while I packed, and as I loaded the last box into my car, I noticed the porch light flickering again, though it wasn't even plugged in. It had been shattered during the break-in. Reeves swore, shot the bulb out, and said quietly, "Let's get you out of here." I thought it was over when I drove out of town, but as I passed the "Welcome to Ridgway" sign, the radio came to life by itself, even though I hadn't touched it. A burst of static filled the car. Then Paul's calm voice whispered through the speakers, "Trick or treat." The car died right there in the middle of the road. The lights on the dashboard went black. I remember crying, pounding the steering wheel, whispering, "Please, not again." And in the rearview mirror, through the fog, I saw the faint outline of someone standing by the road. A figure too tall, too still, head tilted just like before. Reeves's car pulled up seconds later, but when he got out, there was no one there. He towed my car to a lot and told me to stay in touch, but I never went back for it. That was the last night I saw him. 2 weeks later, news broke that Detective Reeves had been found dead in his apartment, all the lights smashed, every mirror in the place shattered, and written across his wall in soot were 3 words: "He's coming through." The police called it a break-in, but I knew better. I moved states the next morning, changed my name, but sometimes when the air grows cold and the wind smells like smoke and wet leaves, the lights in my new apartment flicker 3 times, and I hear it again. The soft, calm voice from nowhere, sometimes Paul's, sometimes something else entirely, whispering in the dark, "You left your light on." And when that happens, I turn every light off and sit in the quiet, praying that whatever came through that night in Ridgway doesn't find its way back.